Let's dive in. We're talking Arsenal today. Big changes potentially on the
It's
horizon.
huge, yeah.
Robert Olabe possibly becoming their new sporting director,
Potentially, yeah.
which has everyone talking.
Absolutely. I mean, you've got Olabe leaving Real Sociedad after smashing it there. And Arsenal, well, they need some fresh thinking, don't they?
They do?
And then there's the whole Alexander Isak thing.
Yeah, the rumor mill's going into overdrive with that one.
Absolutely. It's a fascinating situation, isn't it?
It is. So Olabe, he's not just some random name on a list, is he?
No, not at all. He's got serious pedigree. What he did at Real Sociedad, it wasn't just tweaking things here and there. He completely overhauled the club.
Yeah, Real Sociedad revolution. That's what I keep hearing. But what did he actually do? I need the specifics. Give me the details.
Well, for starters, he won them the Copa del Rey back in 2021,
Right.
which, ended a 34-year trophy drought for them.
Wow.
That alone is massive. But it's more than just the trophy, it's how he did it. Olabe completely changed their style of play. High-pressing, possession-based football. Effective and really entertaining to watch.
Okay, so it wasn't just a fluke cup run.
No, not at all. It was a calculated tactical shift. And you can actually see this in the data. StatsBomb, for example. Real Sociedad were right up there in terms of pressure regains, successful tackles. They weren't just winning, they were dominating opponents, stylistically.
Interesting. And Arsenal have been trying to do something similar under Arteta, haven't they? Possession-based football. Almost feels like their philosophies could be a perfect match.
Exactly. And this tactical shift, it fed into his transfer strategy as well. Olabe was brilliant at finding these undervalued players, perfect fits for his system.
Give me some examples.
Isak and Marino are the classic cases. Brought them in for relatively low fees, they flourished under his guidance, and then boom, sold for huge profits. It's that classic Moneyball approach. But with a clear tactical vision underpinning it all, smart. That's the kind of shrewdness Arsenal could really use, right? Instead of just throwing money at big names, they could be targeting players who actually fit Arteta's system and have the potential to, grow within it.
Exactly. And there's another thing. Olabe, he's big on youth development. Not afraid to give young players a chance.
Right.
And that's a big part of why Real Sociedad have been so successful lately. Lots of academy graduates breaking into the first team.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting for Arsenal fans. Because we've seen glimpses of this with Arteta, haven't we? Players like Saka and Smith Rowe really flourishing.
Absolutely.
But imagine if Olabe comes in and, takes it to the next level, creates this sustainable pipeline of talent from the academy to the first team. That could be a game changer for them in the long run.
It could, yeah. And we have to remember, success doesn't happen overnight. Building a winning team takes time, careful planning, a clear vision, and Olabe seems to have all those qualities. Okay, so we've established that Olabe knows what he's doing. Trophies, sustainable club structure, the whole package. But Arsenal, they have their own issues, don't they? And one that immediately springs to mind: set pieces.
Ah, yes, the set piece problem. It's been their Achilles heel for years, and it's definitely something Olabe would need to address head on. But look, this is a guy who analyzes every single aspect of the game. He'd have a plan.
I hope so. What kind of approach do you think he'd take, though? Because throwing money at the problem, that hasn't worked for them in the past. They've brought in all these specialist coaches, and they still struggle. What would make Olabe different?
Well, Olabe's not afraid to think outside the box. He's data-driven, loves to experiment with new techniques.
Okay.
For example, at Real Sociedad, he brought in this zonal marking system, combined with very specific player movements designed to exploit the opposition's weaknesses. It was about being smarter, more organized, not just bigger or stronger.
So, a system that maximizes your strengths while exploiting your opponent's weaknesses.
Yeah.
Collective intelligence, not just individual brilliance. I like it.
Exactly, and that's where the data comes in. Olabe would analyze hours of footage of Arsenal conceding from set pieces, identify the recurring patterns, then design a system to specifically address those issues.
I'm starting to see why Arsenal fans are so excited about this. So even if he doesn't solve all their defensive woes overnight, his analytical approach, his tactical innovation, it can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. And this attention to detail, it runs through everything he does. Recruitment, youth development, on-field tactics, the whole lot.
All right, I'm convinced this guy sounds like the real deal. But before we start fantasizing about potential transfer targets and all that, we need to talk about the elephant in the room. Alexander Isak.
Oh, the Isak connection. It's juicy, isn't it? I mean, he was incredible at Real Sociedad under Olabe, developed into a top-class striker before he went to Newcastle for, what was it, like 70 million?
Yeah, something like that. Crazy money.
So naturally, everyone's thinking Olabe goes to Arsenal, Isak follows, reunion.
It's the dream, isn't it? But let's be realistic for a second. Isak's a fantastic player, no doubt. But do Arsenal really need another striker? They've already got Gabriel Jesus. Wouldn't that money be better spent elsewhere?
That's a good point. You got to think about squad balance and, of course, the finances. Isak's value must have skyrocketed after that Newcastle move.
Exactly. And while Arsenal have been splashing the cash a bit lately, they're not exactly Man City or Newcastle, are they? Could they even afford him?
Olabe would have to work his magic, that's for sure. But remember, his expertise goes way beyond just one player.
Right. Okay. So let's zoom out a bit. Forget Isak for a minute. If we look at Olabe's transfer philosophy in general, what kind of players does he go for? What are the key things he looks for?
Well, he loves players who are technically gifted, tactically intelligent, comfortable on the ball, can play multiple positions, real high football IQ. Players who can fit into that fluid possession-based system, kind of like what Arteta's trying to build.
The thinking man's footballer, not just athletes, but players who can read the game, make smart decisions.
Exactly. And looking at his past signings, you can see he values versatility, adaptability. Take Mikel Arteta, for example. Brought him to Real Sociedad. This guy can play as a deep-lying playmaker, box-to-box, even defensive midfield if needed.
The Swiss Army knife of footballers. So valuable to have a player like that, someone who can slide into any position.
Exactly. And another thing, Olave's not afraid to scout in those lesser-known leagues. Portugal, Belgium, places where you can find some real gems.
So he's not just looking at the big clubs, the Barcelonas and Real Madrids of the world. He's looking for those hidden talents, the players who might slip under the radar.
Exactly. He's got this knack for finding those undervalued assets. Players who might not have had the same exposure, but have the raw talent to succeed.
This is where it gets exciting, right?
Yeah.
Imagine Olabe unearthing the next Ronaldo or the next Kevin De Bruyne. Signings like that can completely transform a club.
And it's not just about finding them, it's about developing them. Nurturing their talent, integrating them into the squad, building a cohesive team culture. That's what Olabe's really good at.
So it's about creating an environment where players can thrive collectively. That's something Arsenal have been missing, haven't they? That sense of unity.
Yeah, for sure. And this is where Olabe's impact could go way beyond just transfers. It's about instilling a philosophy, a way of thinking that permeates the whole club, from the academy all the way up to the first team.
This all sounds amazing, but let's be practical for a minute. Arsenal have a pretty young squad, and some of their key players, their contracts are running out. What do you think Olabe would do in those situations? Would he try to keep the experienced guys? Or focus on building around the younger core?
That's a tough one. It's about finding the right balance, isn't it? He'd have to look at the squad, assess the age profile, make some tough decisions about who to keep, who to sell, who to offer new contracts to. And with a club like Arsenal, the fans, they expect results. So there's that pressure as well.
Right. And it's not always easy to convince top players to join a club that, hasn't been winning trophies lately. How would Olabe approach that? What would be his pitch?
He's a very articulate guy, very good communicator. He'd have to sell them on the project, the vision, convince them that Arsenal are on the right track, that there's potential for success.
It's almost like he'd be pitching a startup, isn't it? Trying to get investors on board.
Yeah, kind of. He'd have to convince them that joining Arsenal is not just a good career move, it's an opportunity to be part of something special.
Okay, I'm getting carried away here. But before we get lost in all the possibilities, let's take a step back and talk about the potential challenges Olabe might face. At Arsenal, it's easy to get swept up in all the hype. But we have to be realistic. Going from Real Sociedad to Arsenal, that's a big step up, a whole different level of pressure.
It is. The Premier League is a different animal. The competition is fierce, the media scrutiny is intense, and at a club like Arsenal, the expectations are massive.
You mentioned the media, the London tabloids. They're ruthless. Any little mistake, any perceived failure, it's front page news. How do you think Olabe would handle that, coming from a relatively smaller league?
It'll be a steep learning curve, that's for sure. But he seems like a pretty level-headed guy, doesn't get fazed easily, and he's a good communicator. That's important when you're dealing with the English press.
True. But it's not just the media, is it? There's pressure from the fans as well. Arsenal fans, they're passionate, they demand success. They haven't won a league in years. Do you think Olabe could handle that?
It's a fair question. But let's not forget, he took over Real Sociedad when they were in a similar position. Proud history, but struggling to live up to it. He changed their mentality, built a winning culture, got them believing again. If he could do it there, I don't see why he couldn't do it at Arsenal.
Good point. But there's also the financial side of things. Arsenal has spent a lot of money lately, but they're still not in the same league as some of those other clubs. Could Olabe work with those limitations?
Well, that's where his moneyball skills would really come into play, wouldn't they? He'd have to be clever, find those bargains. Players who fit the system, who have the potential to become stars, but I think his track record shows he can do it. Build a competitive squad without breaking the bank.
So maybe instead of going after the big names, the superstars, he'd be looking for those hidden gems, the rough diamonds, who could be polished into something special.
Exactly. And that's not to say he wouldn't be able to attract any big names, but the focus would be different. It would be about finding players who are hungry to prove themselves, who buy into the project.
It's like a cultural shift almost, moving away from that Galactico era of just signing big names for huge fees and building a team with a real identity, a team that's greater than the sum of its parts.
That's it. It's about creating a sustainable model for success that doesn't just rely on money. It's about smart recruitment, youth development, and a clear vision for how you want to play.
I like it. So even though there are challenges, Olabe seems to have what it takes to overcome them. But the big question is, could he replicate what he did at Real Sociedad? Could he bring Arsenal back to the top?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? There are no guarantees in football. But I think appointing Olabe would be a massive statement of intent. He's got the tactical nous, he's a shrewd operator in the transfer market, and he's passionate about developing young players.
It's an exciting prospect, not just for Arsenal fans, but for anyone who loves to see a well-run club with a clear plan for the future.
Absolutely. It'll be fascinating to see how it all plays out.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We've looked at Olabe's background, his philosophy, the potential impact he could have at Arsenal, and the challenges he might face. It's a story full of intrigue and possibility, and for Arsenal fans, maybe a glimmer of hope.
Yeah, definitely one to watch.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Robert Olabe saga. It's sure to be a topic of much debate and speculation in the coming weeks and months. Let us know what you think. What are your predictions? Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.
Thanks for tuning in to the Sound of Sport TV, where we bring you the latest sports news and the hottest beats to keep your energy high. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more thrilling updates. Until next time, stay tuned and stay sporty.